Hello! Today I'm going to take a look at this Shinhan Professional Watercolour set that comes with paintbrushes and some paper, and I thought today I would get it all out and see what's in here. It's taking up valuable real estate in the small amount of space that I have at the moment. I'm still out at my father's as he recovers from hip surgery, and so I am working in a small area with a small desk, and it's just too big to fit in the drawer like this. So let's get this plastic off and let's get into it. So here's everything pulled out of the plastic. Apologies if you're getting a bit of wobble from my camera. I've tried to stabilize it, but I keep nudging it and the whole thing keeps moving. I also only have one light, and so I'm getting a bit of shadowing, but it's the best I can do. I thought Shinhan paints were Chinese, but actually the company is Korean. So there we go, I stand corrected. But it comes with this professional box of watercolors, and there are 24 in here. I have a feeling this might be the second level down. I think there might be an even more artist level over the top of these, so I will let you know if I can figure that out. It comes with a bunch of Taklon looking brushes. They're definitely synthetic, but they seem to be quite nice, and I'm sure they will come in useful. And last of all is some paper by Arto, which I've never heard of in my life. I am a little annoyed because I honestly thought that was 100% cotton, but no, it's 100% cellulose. Dull. Never mind, I will do my best with it. I have my cotton sketchbook with me just in case this paper doesn't work. It's definitely cold press, and there is a bit of a texture going on there. Not sure how it's going to go, so I guess we'll find out when I start painting on it. And let's have a look at the tubes of paint. It's a nice looking box. I was drawn to the cardboard box of them. Also, I've been wanting to try Shinhan paints for quite a while, and I'd never seen them before except for in this one shop in Melbourne called Zeta Florence. That's where I picked this kit up. If I can ever get the box open, we will see what the tubes look like. And here we go. So they are 7.5mm, and they look to be all organised in colour order, so I'll probably just keep them like this. Let's pull a tube out and see what information's on the tube itself. Oh, it does have the pigments, that's great. I'm always happy when the pigments are included so I don't have to try and look them up online. And it's got the name of it. This is a Cobalt blue hue. I have a feeling that these are more like a student level paint, or perhaps that semi-professional grade, because also here we have cerulean blue hue. Usually with a lot of paints, when everything is a hue rather than the genuine pigment, it's almost always not professional grade. Although having said that, some professional grade paints like Schmincke Horridam, for example, will have a few paints that do have a hue in there. But for the most part, they generally aren't maybe the top tier. But that's okay, I didn't pay a huge amount for these. It was a reasonable price. And looking on here, yes, there's light-fast information. This one has 2 stars, this one has 3. Not entirely sure which way they go, so I'll see if I can figure that out. There's also a little box here, so this one would indicate that it's semi-transparent, and this empty box here would be transparent. But I think they look quite pretty in the box like that. And now I'm going to ruin them by squeezing some of the paints out. I bought this watercolour palette separately, just because I knew I needed to find something to put all 24 paints in, and I found one that has 24 holes or wells in it. So I'm going to open this up and check it out. I think this is definitely Chinese. Not sure what the colour is. It says red on the front, but I have a feeling it might not be. And sure enough, it is blue, but that's okay because I really like this colour as well. So I picked this up at Senior Art Supplies. It was relatively cheap, just a little plastic thing, but I thought it would be handy for the Shinhan paints. How the heck does this thing open? Okay, that took entirely too long to figure out. I'm trying to open it from the ends and it was bending in the middle, but if you just pull it from the middle, it opens so easily. Oh, I'm so thick sometimes. But, I mean, there's no instructions, so I just have to work it out. There we go. It's quite cute. I mean, there's not a huge amount of mixing space, but I do like the fact that it's got some really deep wells. Of course, these paints aren't really that large to fill these wells, so I'll probably just put a little bit in each one so I can see it. Go. Not sure why I put that yellow ochre so different to the others, so I'll put a bit more in just to even it up. There we go, that looks a bit better. Now of course it's all coming out of the tube. So I just pulled a small amount in for now because I do want them to dry relatively quickly. Plus I have both cats out with me, so I don't want them walking on the paint and wrecking it. It's the next day and I of course have now done my research on these paints. So we are looking here at the Shinhan Professional paints, but there is indeed another level above these, and that is the Shinhan Premium paints, and it should be the premium paints that I wanted to get. So what I'm going to do is still swatch everything out and play with these. The professional ranges, it would be like the Winsor & Newton Cotmans, I imagine. That would be why this paper is 100% cellulose and not 100% cotton. And also why I paid under $100 for the whole lot. I think what I will actually do is look into getting some of the professional ones as well, and further down the track we can compare the two. So it's not a big disaster, it's just not quite what I was expecting to start up with. But interestingly enough, there are some pigments in there that I have never seen before. One of them is this PR63:1, and what else was there? There's a few orange ones that I am not super familiar with. Now I can't remember. There were a couple of others in here, but I just can't remember which ones they were. Maybe PBR25 was another one that I'd never seen. So I'll swatch these out and talk about them a bit more as I'm doing that. I'll come back to the white once that black ink has dried because I forgot to do that, but I'm going to start in with the black here, which is PBK6 and a carbon black, a fairly standard pigment. I remembered to wet the paper before putting the paint down just to see if they would run. Not really. I think partly this is due to the paper and also the paints themselves. This is not necessarily a deal breaker. In fact, when paints don't run, it's sometimes easier to control them. But going on to the next one here, we've got Dyke Brown, using a very common pigment here, PR101, synthetic iron oxide red. This is a really strange one for Dyke Brown. Usually PR101 is found in burnt sienna because it has that reddish tone, and usually Dyke Brown is a much darker colour. Never mind, we'll move on to the next one, and we have Crimson Lake here, which is a mix of actual alizarin crimson PR83, that's the fugitive one, and this other one, PR63:1, which is Lithol Bordeaux, and that would explain why this colour is Bordeaux, because it is made entirely of that. Doing a bit of a quick read, it's normally used in industrial paints. I've never seen it used in a watercolour, but it's an absolutely beautiful colour. I will be showing it a bit later in a painting. You could see how staining it is on that brush too. Moving on to another brown colour, and this is red ochre, once again with PR101, so you can see how red that iron oxide gets. Next up is another unfamiliar pigment in brown red, and this is Benzema Dazzling Brown. I'd not seen this one. It does seem to be a lot weaker tinting than the PR101, and I don't know, I didn't really like that one so much. I always prefer a strong pigment. Next we have raw umber, which once again is a really strange mix and does not look like raw umber at all. This is PY42, which is yellow iron oxide, and PR101, which is that synthetic red iron oxide. Just such a weird combination. I would have called that one burnt ochre. And next we have a brown which is actually made with a brown pigment, PBR7 or brown iron oxide. It still looks pretty orange though, doesn't it? I don't know, none of the browns were that great. Maybe the Van Dyke's okay, but they're all just very red.
And speaking of red, we have red, which is PR17, and when I looked this one up, it's just called Pigment Red 17. I haven't heard of this one either. Vermilion Hue is up next, and that's a mix of PO16, which is Benzidine Orange, and PR48:1, which is Permanent Red BB. I'm pretty sure a lot of these are industrial pigments which are maybe used to paint cars and other things like that. It's just such a weird combination of pigments, but I do quite like that orange. I think it's really bright, and the vermilion's okay. And then I went back to the white now that black ink had settled. This is a PW6 titanium white. It's pretty much a standard white watercolour, not very useful. I really like the yellow ochre in this set. This is PY42 or yellow iron oxide, and also mixed in with a bit of diarylide yellow PY83. And then we have a really beautiful permanent yellow deep, which is PY83 again, that diarylide yellow. It's so warm and lovely. And then lemon yellow is PY3 Hansa yellow mixed in with titanium white PW6. That's an odd one. Normally lemon yellow does not have any white in it, and you can't really tell it does in this one either. On to yellow green, which is a convenience mix, and that is Hansa yellow PY3 mixed in with PG7 phthalo green blue shade. All of the greens here I think have phthalo green blue shade in them for the most part, especially this Vermilion Hue, which is actually just PG7, and quite often a lot of companies will do Viridian as PG7 rather than original Viridian, which does not re-wet. It's terrible, so I'm happy to have a hue in this case. Sap green's basically the same as yellow green, but with the pigment numbers reversed, so there's more phthalo green in this one and slightly less Hansa yellow. It's quite a nice colour, but does look very similar to the yellow green. And then olive green is mixed up with PG8 nitroso green, PY1 monolite yellow, and PY2 another version of Hansa yellow. Such a strange combination, but it's quite a nice colour. I like it. Then moving on to the blues, Cobalt Blue Hue is a standard mix of ultramarine and phthalo blue green shade. That's the PB29 and PB15:3. Then Cerulean Blue Hue is basically just phthalo blue. Normally cerulean blue is a really granulating colour, and this one is not at all, because phthalo blue isn't. Ultramarine is PB29 is what I would expect for that, and it works quite nicely. I think there's a tiny bit of granulation in it, but nothing too major. Ultramarine can vary from really granulating to not granulating at all. Next we have Prussian Blue, which is actually phthalo blue green shade, but it actually does look quite a bit like Prussian Blue, interestingly enough. I'm pretty sure actual Prussian Blue is PB27, something like that. And last one we have is Violet, PV3, which is methyl violet, and PR81 rhodamine 6G. Once again, a couple of pigments that I'd never heard of.
Well, this paper has completely buckled. Look at that. Otherwise, it seems to be holding the paint relatively well. So here are all the colours now that they're dry. They don't look too bad. I'm not really seeing any chalkiness or anything like that. But they do have a feeling of being student grade. I don't really know how to describe that or explain what that particular quality is to them, but it's definitely just got that student grade to it. So you can see this one looks like it's wet still, but it's actually just gone really sticky, and I think that might be the gum arabic or something. It's just not quite bound together. It's so sticky. There's a little bit of granulation in the ultramarine. That's about it. None of the others are particularly granulating, which I wouldn't really expect in student grade paints, to be honest. I sound so derisive when I say that. I'm just a little bit annoyed at myself for getting the wrong ones, but that's just my personal little beef. So I guess now I should do some painting with them and see how they react. I think I might paint on the rest of this paper first, and then maybe do something in my cotton sketchbook as well, because I think the paper's not really helping.
Because the cellulose paper had buckled really badly for the swatching, I taped down the rest of it with some washi tape that I got from Kmart. I had to go out and get it because I completely forgot to bring washi tape out with me. Anyway, moving on with the actual painting, I drew in a couple of butterfly fish, and I'm going around the background with some of those different blues. You can see how streaky this paint is on this paper. It is the paper doing it, as I will show you later when I use some cotton for comparison. So it was a bit frustrating, but I managed to get a painting done out of this. I tried using the brown red, but it just wasn't strong enough of a brown, so the red ochre over the top was good. It's a much more opaque pigment and a lot better. I was just painting in some kind of coral rocks, it wasn't anything major. And then one of the fish here is going in with the red, vermilion and orange, and then the one in front I've gone in with lighter yellows just to get a bit of contrast. They're really pretty bright colours. I liked them, but the paper was just holding me back and it was very frustrating. So if you're a beginner, I really recommend getting yourself some cotton paper because it will make painting so much easier. It's really hard to get anything good even for an experienced artist, because cellulose paper as a rule just does not cooperate well with watercolors or any kind of water-based media. Never mind, I got a painting done, it's bright, and it didn't buckle too badly because I had that tape just holding it down for dear life. I also don't have my scanner with me, so a photo is going to have to do. Anyway, moving on to less annoying paper. This is the Etcher sketchbook with 100% cotton paper, and I really wanted to paint with that Bordeaux colour. Immediately I thought of a wine glass, wine bottle and some grapes, so I sketched that on half of the paper, and now I'm just painting in that gorgeous Bordeaux colour. I've never seen anything like it. Even Daniel Smith's Bordeaux is nothing like this. It's a totally different pigment and it doesn't have that beautiful red wine colour quite like this one does, so I really like this. Apparently it's also quite a light fast pigment as well, so I'm hoping I'll be able to find it again in the professional set of paints, or should I say the premium set. For the bottle itself, I actually mixed in some of the Bordeaux with the Viridian, and it made a really neat colour. It was kind of a bluish green, but a little bit of purple kind of floating through it. The two pigments split apart a bit, and I just thought that was really fascinating. So I did a few layers because this paper just absorbs the paint in, and it always benefits from painting in layers. The paint worked perfectly well when layering on cotton paper. You could see there is quite a drying shift though. That is the paper causing that to some extent. I used some of the violet colour for the grapes and decided they were just a bit too purple, so I also added in more Bordeaux into the grapes. I think it just really ties the whole picture together, and it's definitely my favourite colour in this entire set. It's so pretty. I know another viewer had mentioned it, and I can see for myself now why you love it so much, because I also do. It's gorgeous. I mixed in some of the different greens for the foliage on the grapes and just let it run into each other. Though, as I mentioned before, the paints don't really run out of control like some other professional brands do, which is sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing, just depends on what you prefer. And then I'm just going back and filling in some details, going over things again to get a deeper tonal range, and then I just added in a background of different blues, which took over the whole painting, and so I had to go back and paint everything else again just to make it darker. But I think you could see here just how well the blues blend into the background and don't cause that streakiness that they did on the cellulose paper. This is why you need to use cotton paper with your watercolours. It instantly improves everything, even if you're not very experienced with painting. While the background was still wet, I splashed on some extra colour just to make it slightly more interesting. It was just looking a bit flat, and that's what it looks like once the whole thing had dried. And you could see I'm just going over everything one more time just to add in a darker level because the bottle had kind of faded into the background, and it's just a matter of layering until you're happy. The paints themselves worked really nicely. I think they're a good quality and I was very happy with them. As long as you have good paper, these paints work perfectly well. I mean, they're not top of the line, so isn't anything noticeably wrong with them. I mean, there's no filler showing through or anything like that. They're not chalky, which is the most important thing. Chalky watercolors are just the worst, and I don't recommend them. It doesn't matter how cheap they are. But these are pretty inexpensive and I think quite good value for their price. The last thing I did was go over with a white gel pen and just add in some highlights and make that glass really stand out so it looks like the light is shining on the edges of the glass. And I went over a few other areas because my grapes had kind of just turned into a big blob, so I'm using that white highlight to outline some of their shapes, and I think this just finished it off. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Maybe minus the bit at the top. And I had a little bit of space for one more painting, so I thought I'd paint the whole thing with some water and just do full wet on wet to see how they'd go. You can see they're running a little bit, but not as much as perhaps some other paints I've tried. It's a bit of a sunset thing. I started off with purple and moved down into a gradient into yellow, and I let the paint dry fully before going over with another layer because I really wanted to build up those colours. They work really well for this. Maybe not quite as heavily pigmented as fully professional watercolours, but close enough, and with a bit of layering they were fine. No issues whatsoever once again. So when I was happy with the background, I let it dry and then peeled off the washi tape. Those borders are so satisfying. I found my little brass travel ruler and I'm drawing in some power lines which I just thought could be interesting on this. I've seen quite a lot of pictures lately and so I thought I'd try my own. I'm just using a black rollerball pen here with waterproof ink. Not that it needs to be because I'm drawing over the top of the dried watercolours, and each power pole gets a bit shorter as it leads off into the distance. A very simple drawing, but it actually turned out pretty effective. I really like how this one came out in the end.
Here's what the paint looks like on good cotton watercolour paper. I think they've held up really well actually, and I'm liking them. They're a nice quality. Yeah, they do feel a little bit student grade-ish, but they're not anywhere as studenty as some other ones I've tried, which have a lot more filler and aren't as nicer quality as these. In comparison, here's the painting I did on the cellulose paper. You could just see that streaky background by comparison to this one, which has blended in beautifully into the background. So the paper makes a huge difference, but they do look quite nice together, all bright and lit up. I can't lift my camera any higher than this on the mount, so I'll just kind of slide them a bit like that. The brushes are stained, but they worked perfectly well. None of the hairs came out, which is always a win, and overall they are solidly built, so I have no issues with the brushes. I do like the wooden handles on them. I think they're really nice to hold. The paper itself that came in the packet is pretty terrible. I don't know that I would really bother using this for paintings, but it's probably fine just for draft copies, or I might even try some ink on it to just see how that goes, but using a lot of wet media on it, it's just not that great. I just much prefer to use a cotton watercolour paper. And as for the paints themselves, here is what my palette looks like after I've used it and did a bit of mixing. I really love that Bordeaux and the dark green colour together. I think those two work out really well and make a really pretty mix. So as a set of watercolours, the Shinhan Professional paints are actually pretty good. and I do like them. I really want to try the highest level premium watercolors, so I'm going to keep an eye out for those and see if I can get a set. I think there is actually a 24 set of them as well. It would be so much fun to do a direct comparison between the highest grade paints and these middle of the range ones, just to see if there is any difference between them. I have a feeling there will be. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, especially if you're in the market to buy yourself some Shinhan paints, and just don't make the same mistake I did. If you were looking for the artist grade ones, make sure you get the Shinhan PWC, or it's called SWC if you get them directly from Korea. I think the only difference is that the PWC is designed for export. That's what I was reading about. So the PWC basically stands for premium, not professional. The professional grade paints are a lower grade. But having said that, they are pretty good on their own. They weren't too expensive, and it's a nice range of colours, an unusual range of pigments in there, so completely different to pretty much every other set that I have. So they have their good points, not too many bad points that I can see, and they are a nice set, especially if you just want to start out. But please get yourself some cotton paper. It just makes life so much easier, and it's a lot less frustrating to use. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, and I will see you all again really soon in my next video. Have a fantastic day out there. Swatch you later. Bye!